let's start now. Welcome everybody on board. Now, I'll begin my introductory remarks, and then I'd like each of you to let's hold a discussion. I'll begin. Uh, Rate Samadhi by Geetanjali Shree in Hindi, and its English translation, Tomb of Sand by Daisy Rockwell, celebrates family relationships, feminism, history, and even topics like global warming, Buddhism. It is yet another addition to partition literature and uses the analogy of doors, the opening and closing of doors, and how these divide lovers and family and become symbols of religious fanaticism and hatred. This story of over 700 pages surprisingly is woven with very few characters. The protagonist is Ma, her son, Bade, his wife Bahu, who incidentally is named Sushila, her daughter Beti, and the transgender Rosie or Raza, the grandson Sid, and the sometimes mentioned overseas son. Now, the division of the three parts make it very easy for the reader to understand the story better, as part one is about the period of Ma at her son's house, uh, overcoming depression and is always in bed. And thereafter, these 234 pages are very good in terms of pictorial depictions of the Bahu and Beti Cold Wars and everybody trying to get Ma out of her depression to bring her back, so to say. But it makes very, shall I use the word, boring reading for me. Now, part two of Ma, moving to her daughter's house, is much more interesting, opening doors to the bohemian lifestyle of the daughter, having a very open affair with the aptly titled Sunlight, the role of Rosie or Raza, and how a close bond of friendship develops between a transgender and a lady of 80 years old. It actually educates us, readers, of not looking at transgenders with colored spectacles. And it's quite a revelation to me, actually, that the same person sometimes dresses up as a woman, sometimes as a man. And it's something so liberal and full of freedom, which we ourselves cannot do. Now, how the doctor takes care of her mother, because there are societal expectations on a daughter-in-law to behave the way she must behave. For example, how Bahu is very troubled by the fact that the Beti has taken over of looking after her mother-in-law and what society will say and things like that. And how also the real life daughter in me makes me blame the Bahu, who is solely responsible, I feel, for the entry of Ma to Pakistan without a visa in the first place, using her influence as the instructor, being an instructor of the daughter of a Pakistan High Commissioner, teaching her yoga, when everything could have been very legally possible, and how she even never tries to undo the wrong once the mother-in-law is in jail in Pakistan. Now, this 295 pages of part two make very interesting reading because they celebrate feminism and at different levels of empowerment, of liberalism, of the freedom of a girl to live life the way she would like to live her life against societal norms and yet being fully responsible as a daughter should be. Now, the part three of the book, though it's just less than 200 pages, is a welcome change to partition literature. I have grown up in my family uh, partition because I have a Muslim. who is African Kenyan. But when I saw the name Layalpur in the book, it woke me up because I've heard about my sister and Gurdaspur and Hoshiarpur and Layalpur. These were the towns which were badly affected during the partition days. And I've heard my sister talking about her pupo, her father's sister, jumping in the well because, according to my sister-in-law, a Hindu, and when she says Hindu, it meant at that point of time in partition, a Sikh had raped her puppi and she had to jump in the well, which was a family narrative, which seems so real. And then when the Geetanjali talks about wells, how the only remedy for the girls is to jump in the well, the story runs so true that riots can dehumanize people and how the Sikhs, their whole psyche of being loving sardars and who serve langars and pray in gurdwaras can suddenly change into a very bestial kind of a psyche. So this is something which was very close. And this part three has, according to me, stories within stories, narratives within narratives. Of course, it begins with the scenes at the Wagh border, as most partition literature do, and the illegal ways in which people, cross borders, and the names of the different writers who, if you've done on partition, if you've read partition literature, then Kushwant Singh and Joginder Paul and Balwant Singh and Bisham Sahani, they have their own discourses, their own story lines. And, once those who have not read them, if you appreciate the pain of their writing, then it becomes very interesting writing. And how, there is a particular page, page 50, I think it's 652, which that one page, if not the book, can, can get for the author an International Booker Prize win. It's about how the author talks about borders and how the doors open and doors close in borders, and how different borders affect different relationships, and how on page 668, these borders, how they are never there in human relationships, and yet they define the division of nations, having these artificial borders. So this makes very special reading, page 668 and 652, which discusses the author's writing on borders. And then, how Ma remembers both her younger days and what Rosie had discussed with her when she traveled through Pakistan. And that's what Beti says, that these are the narratives of Rosie telling her over long discussions about the areas and the lanes and the by lanes of Pakistan, and actually also Ma's childhood that she was experiencing with a lot of joy. Sorry. Talks about the about Ma's remembrances about burning of her house and how she was so responsible for that, and then about the group of girls being taken away to nowhere, and the third tale about the sea of sand and how sandstorms, how human beings experience sandstorms we have really never done in Goa, and how Ma and Rosie survive the whole survival issue in that partition, and how she talks about Anwar, her husband, and the partridge and the crow analogy about Ma and Anwar. How people who are so different can yet be so close to each other, and how when Ma is so stubborn when it comes to the interrogation. I'm sure a lot of you have faced this kind of people, whether they are old or young, where they are so stubborn, like it's my way or highway. And however much Betty tries to convince Ma to answer what is right with the hope that they'll be released, she is nowhere near to what her daughter says. So the stubbornness in the old lady to believe in what she believes till the end. And you know, the thing that struck me about this whole book was that, which I realized later, which Daisy Rockwell talks about. She talks about in her translation the Dwani of Hindi, which comes across. And I was wondering, how these could be English words. Maybe they are, maybe they are not. I have listed as I read about 200 and over words which meanings I myself could not understand, like harem scarum on page 698 and discombobulated. I'm sure Brian knows as an English teacher, and mosaic and loquacious and maybe somnambulant, and I can go on and on. Okay, and I've kept these words written down so that my whole English literature improves. And I'm so happy that, some of us are so passionate about this, that Savia draws pictures about the themes of the whole book. And I'm so happy, Savia, being an artist. And now I throw the room for discussion. If any of you would like to speak about your feelings, you're most welcome. Maybe Brian could start or Savia could start.
No, let Brian start. I'll take
Okay,
over after that. Please unmute.
Unmute, Brian. Unmute.
Thank you, Sushila, for that wonderful magisterial introduction to this amazing book, because though it might have put off some people by its girth, it says so many things in so many ways. Tremendous number of themes which take you almost a lifetime to discover. And you've done such a commendable job by laying out the territory which we may traverse if we will. I'd like to reflect on the theme of partition, because we teach partition literature at TY level. And this business of borders, and you were so precise as to quote the actual page number, and I have it here, page number 652. The way you brought out the nuances of this book is so edifying. Thank you, Sushila. I'd like to say that right in the beginning. And it takes me back to the other book that is prescribed on our TY syllabus, which is Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh. He says, you see, a border is a shadow. It serves no purpose. And if you look at even José Saramago, the Portuguese novelist, he talks about, he talks about the fish underneath the river Tagus. And he says, are these fish belonging to Spain or to Portugal? That is an immense point that he's making, where the artists are talking about the collapsibility of borders, and that borders, are just a construct which cause people to, be have animosity against each other. There is also this large section where the author resurrects Bishan Singh from Manto's short story, and he gives him a life. Yes, he gives him a Tobatek Singh, and he gives him a life and a character, which another very famous poet has done, which is also in our syllabus. So how do you actually reconcile this business of partition with a very personal kind of journey of the lead character, that's this octogenarian lady? It's a very unlikely and a unique kind of mix. Anyone would like to reflect on that?
Just repeat.
Yes, here you have a lead character who is 80 years old, and she's the one who actually gives impetus to the novel. She's the fulcrum of the novel, and it is her movement, like even the Dadima in Shadow Lines, who takes the novel to its logical conclusion. Rather than concentrating on her own personal life, which, as you rightly said in the first section, we are absorbed with her, her helplessness as a woman, as an old woman. How can she, how does the author imbue her with the strength to take on the theme of partition? I mean, she does it so skillfully, don't you think?
True, true. And in fact, Savia, would you like to intervene?
Yes. The first image I have of Ma is her disappearing into a wall, and everyone treating her like a sick person, And then slowly there is this change. She goes from Bade's house to her daughter's house. And suddenly you have this scene on page 387, I think, where Bade comes to see his mother. I'm jumping because I don't think we have so much time. And then he's looking at her and says, look, she's wearing something loose without layers. And she's almost looking like a dervish. She can fall down. Is she pirouetting also? And she's sitting on a swing. There's the sunlight on her. And it's a new Ma. And then he gets into this rhapsodic dream where he is in a tree with the crows, and the crows are, also indoctrinating the younger crows about what saris mean, what is unfolding essentially in Bade's brain. He's looking at her through layers, through the layers of saris. And I found that very interesting. I was trying to look at it whether, she goes meticulously into the fabric of India, into the textile of India. So she goes state by state, she unfolds those wraps. And as they come out from Bade's brain, they cover the entire tree. And I found that fascinating because he had covered every region of India. And right from his childhood to growing up, how in patriarchy, a young boy would grow to be a young man in patriarchal India and look at his mother through saris, through those folds of clothing. And then he remembers, her coming from the temple with lamps like a goddess. And then he remembers her like a warrior queen when she hits him because he is taking extra laddus or bhajiyas or whatever she's made. And she said there won't be enough for dinner. So, typically she adopts the thing of a warrior queen and at one portion the goddess. And then he's very unhappy to see her. He likes her costumed in those layers. He doesn't like to see her as a darwish breaking out from the shell of womanhood which is imposed on her and breaking free, And typically, I think she journeys that 80-year-old woman very well because, from being a grandmother to Sid and mother to Bade and, looking after, what's her name? Reeboks, okay? The granddaughter-in-law. She suddenly gets free. She's wearing a darwish dress and she's probably pirouetting to get another persona, which tries to unravel this whole narrative of pain of partition and take it into a different territory. It becomes a narrative of separation. It becomes a narrative of lost love, which needs to be united. It becomes a borderless terrain, which they journey through. And it is Choti, the mother leading the daughter, actually. And I found that analogy very beautiful because she's actually, kind of teaching the daughter of the past. And in a way, a woman would. So there's no pain, there's no bloodshed, there's no, a train full of dead people arriving, nothing of that. But these two take agency and cross the border to look and reunite to a past. And I think there's something very beautiful that she says, it says, if you cut a border through a heart, you don't call it a border, you call it a wound. Okay, so she redefines what has been defined earlier. Just one sec. Yes, Roxanne? Yeah. Just our session is on. I'll talk to you later. Are you joining? Okay. So that is essentially my take on it, and I love this beautiful thing of giving her a walking stick, and the walking stick is full of butterflies. There are no weapons, there is no acrimony, but she just needs to be united with a lover who's old, who reunite with that love story and reignite it again, which is what she does. But of course, there is the reality to it where she has to suffer for what has happened. She's crossed the territory, this and that, and finally she dies. And I love the celebration of her death. The butterflies free themselves from her cane and they spread all around over her. And I think that book had some special moments. Okay, that's my take on it. Anyone would like to share?
Yes, Savia. Marion would like to. Have I pronounced your name correctly, Marion? Yes.
It's Marion, but if you say it in English, it's Marion, you can say.
Marion.
Actually, it's a long time ago that I read the book because we wanted to meet also a long time ago. And it was a very, very thick book also. So I wanted to be in time, but now I really forgot most of the things. And I also didn't understand so many things, I have to admit, especially the situation with the saris and the crows. I really didn't understand what she wanted to say. So I'm very thankful to Sevia that she she shared her view, and now in the discussion, then I can understand the book much better, I think. And for me, it was a long time not clear where she wants to go. And I didn't understand also that it is partition literature. I understood very late, you can say. And there are so many different parts, and I didn't understand how it is connected, you know, because first it was in the home of her son, then in the home of her daughter, then the relationship with Rosie. Also for me, most interesting character was Rosie. I think Rosie was her name, no?
Yes.
Yeah, this which I liked very much, this character, because she really lives the whole freedom, I think, in my opinion, and she doesn't care about the society rules, which I like very much. But I didn't understand why she was there then, and this was for me without any connection. I didn't get it, so maybe I didn't understand well. Yeah.
Can I just make an addition?
Yes, Savia.
What I loved is, the narrative had a new structure to it, which was the structure of telling. Like, everything is being told as it is happening. It's a colloquialism. Like, for example, I'll give you one small example, but you can read this in many places. Like, one whole chapter is Rosie died. And then the story follows in the next chapter. Isn't that, I mean, in colloquial life, isn't that how we talk? When we report a death, we don't say, oh, she died. Da, 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 da. It is, Rosie died. And then the story follows what happens, the other details of the event. So I think that she's captured that colloquialism very well. The other thing is lots of people had problems about the pace. But if you see the oral this thing of storytelling in India, it follows the pace of that. You know, it goes round and round. Sometimes the language is very repetitive. You are given choices for a word and explained in everything. But I think that's the way of, the way we speak, the way we tell. And what is interesting is everything centers around the tree. First is that unfolding of the saris. Then she'll tell you, she says, a dream is like a tree where each branch sings its own story, holding hands and emerging separately as well. I'm not able to quote the page, but the tree analogy, the bird analogy, all these things are so beautifully done. The butterflies, then Rosie's duality as a personality. Uh, that's what probably makes her whole. I mean, Shiva and Parvati are androgynous. Ardha Nareshwara is half male Shiva and half female Parvati. It's there in our reading of gods and goddesses. It's also there in our reading of psychology. If you read Kakkar or if you read any of the psychoanalysts writing on India, they'll talk about the femininity of the Indian man. You don't find that in Western macho culture. But here you'll have a man who will cry, a man who will cook, a man who will make laddus, and show several other feminine traits which are so typically believed to be those of women. So, what do you call it? I think Athena, or what it is, the feminine, when a man has a feminine side, which, not Freud, but Jung talks to a large extent about the Asiatic male having a different psyche, not totally masculine, but masculine as well as feminine. And Sudhir Kakkar also brings it out in a lot of his writings. So that is all I wanted to, yeah. And also, interestingly, she puts across many things when she describes Ma. She says, it was the case of a body becoming a soul. Ma has nothing to lose. She's lived her life. She's set up her family. She now wants to define life on her own terms. And Rosie is the only one who helps her break from that eggshell, Rosie is the only one who redefines her clothes, who gives her those dervish kind of clothes, where she can pirouette, where she can discover the soul within her body. Talk of an inner life, talk of, the richness and purity of life, rather than all the time of war, of revenge, of destruction, which doesn't befit her feminine character, because you will see all through history, these are very masculine things, And while you see in Rosie a masculine and a feminine, you find Ma breaking away from the feminine, adopting a masculine, because she goes once to the bathroom and discovers actually she has a growth, and she keeps on referring to it as a penis. But in her new discovery of this masculinity, it's a very immersive masculinity, which brings out the good of humanity, the good of human life. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. I think Linda would like to.
Shiva?
Yes, so Linda.
Sushila and Savya, can you both keep on going and talking about this book, because it is so very interesting.
Yes. Of time, I'm trying to involve first. So Deepa would like to. Deepa, would you like to?
Thank you, Sushi.
Let me introduce Deepa.
Hi. Nice to see you guys.
She's the HOD of the English department in Government College, Kepe, and she has done her PhD on partition literature.
Can you just tell Aarti Das to unmute or show her face? Sushila?
Yes.
Can you please ask Aarti Das to unmute?
You want Aarti to unmute? Deepa?
Because she's not listening to what's happening. Even Cleo's on mute.
Yeah, but Deepa is going to speak now, Savia.
Okay, okay.
Go ahead, Deepa.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Just
Thank
sit
you.
up a little bit. Just sit up a little bit deeper so that I can see your face. Still not visible fully. Even a little.
Now?
That's good. That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was so comfortable in your discussion that I, kind of got very comfy sitting down. What I liked about the book was the language, actually. I've read a lot of partition literature thanks in part to my thesis, and they speak a lot about the violence and treat it like a disease or like insanity. But this particular book, the language was amazing in the sense that the words kind of play on the page. Very interestingly, Ma'am Savia spoke about the structure of the book, which I must say was very, very insightful, because the words just jump off the page. They kind of dance and they create these images of butterflies, of trees, of saris, even the sand, the borders. Brian very nicely spoke about Ghosh's shadow lines, which again talks about the looking glass borders. Similarly here, sand, where you can write things in sand and the wind just wipes things away. Yeah. So those kind of images, she has played brilliantly with words, and that is what really touched me. The entire story from the female point of view. There are other stories also that women, the central character is the woman. But in this particular story, you have an elderly woman with a very generic name, Ma, could be anybody's mother. Bade, again, could be anybody's elder son. Beti could be anybody's daughter, very generic names. Surprisingly, a very particular story. And that again highlighted a lot of different, because this is familial memory. You have stories of partition in every family that was affected by the partition. So this is very, very different from the kind of literature that came out instantly after partition. And I think Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children was again, what should I say, milestone, because he changed the form of narrative. And now you have a new narrative, which was amazing. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you, Deepa. And I also agree with you that, the reading of this book made me so happy because, I've written down so many words like how do you pronounce this? Shenanigans and, discombobulated and loquacious. And, it makes me so happy to learn new words. I've never read, in my whole life. So Shiva Ramesh, we can have you next.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So I read the book a while back, so I don't remember the points precisely, but I'll still touch upon a couple of points that I found very interesting about the book. So the first thing is that it's very noticeable about the novel is that Tomb of Sand doesn't need any labels. What I mean is you cannot pinpoint it into a specific genre or category. You can think of it as a feminist novel. You can think about it as a partition novel. In between, it discusses topics like global warming, history, philosophy, other Indian literature. So I feel this novel marches to its own blend. It doesn't strive to fit into any structure. And we as human beings, we always tend to categorize things, especially books, into different genres or different categories. So this novel doesn't try to do that. And in that way, it stands out from other novels that are being written. And the second point is obviously translation. Any discussion about this book will not be complete if it doesn't talk about Daisy Rockwell's impeccable translation. So what I have heard from people who have read the original Hindi version is that that book is very rich in sounds. And that meaning comes parallel, if not secondary, in that novel. So even if you have not read the Hindi version, you'll recognize how Daisy Rockwell has incorporated the richness of sounds in her translation. So we all know that translation is a very difficult task. You have to know the right words to use at the right time. And that becomes even more difficult when sound becomes more important than meaning. So Tomb of Sand is a novel that you need to hear, not just something that you have to read with your eyes. So Rockwell, I feel, has done an excellent job in choosing the right words, and sometimes she has left some things untranslated as well. So that, I feel, is a very important thing about Tomb of Sand. And when Sushila ma'am was discussing, I remembered another point, and that is how Geetanjali Shree explores in detail the nuances of an Indian family, a quintessential Indian family and its dynamics. You can see the tension between Beti and Bahu, the question of who will take care of the mother, and now that she needs care, people say, I mean, we looked after her all this time, now you do it for a while. So that attitude, the household where all decisions have to surround the serious elder son. So all that Geetanjali Shree has put out in a playful tone, and that too mixed with sarcasm. So that is something I felt about the novel.
Right. And is Aarti okay with the audio to come in? Aarti, are you there? Would you like to come in? Okay. Now that we have more or less discussed the novel thread there, I think what is important is that what I have done is actually I agree with Savia. I have written page by page what I liked about the writing, but that would be too much in detail. But I could give you a few examples, like the writer saying that on page 683, a reader should be a traveler. You kind of travel with the story, and how the narrative of the story reminds the reader that this is actually a story. Like the writer keeps saying, like Savia said, no, the story now will go this way, and the fiction is kept aside, and the writer, I've not read this elsewhere, this type of narrative which says that the story should have moved this way, but it's going this side, and bear with the writer. That kind of a one-to-one connect with the reader comes across very well when the writer writes like this, which I have not found in any other fiction novels. The Brian and Deepa can correct me if I'm wrong. And there's also one line like where on 463, Beti says she's sick of herself, like a kind of a confession that we all can be sick of ourselves at one time or the other, but we hate to admit it, and therefore we fail to correct why we are sick and go the right way. So Beti, of course, is the whole mother and daughter connection is so lovely to read, because the mother is as bohemian as the daughter. And normally, with the older generation, one expects a particular narrative. But with the younger generation, this is understandable. But in a story, when an 80-year-old does things which are really unacceptable, or maybe something very different, like befriending a transgender, where changing her clothes, doing what she wants to do, when there are, the people would say now it's the time for you to retire and you can not be adventurous. She decides to be as much full of adventure that anybody can be, you know, and how she just laps life, just celebrates life by befriending a transgender and going on to help her with her NGO work and, charitable work at the age of 80, and how talented the old woman is with her hands in doing things which, knits and what is that? Snips and bits which she can sell for charity. So using her talent and using her things to be yet profitable in her life to society. And, there are many things like how she talks about, Geetanjali speaks about, she speaks about, the middle part of Buddha and how Buddha lies buried in the tomb of sand on page 161. And this narrative about Buddhism into the whole narrative about Hinduism and respect for Buddhism, and how she clings on to that statue of Buddha for her life, like how we sometimes are made stronger by clinging on to the statues of saints and statues. Would anybody else like to come in? Uh,
I found that Buddha analogy very interesting because, when she's coming, when all is lost, when, it's typically a Tova Tek Singh situation that the nation is being divided. Buddha actually belongs to that part of the portion, but she finds a peace and solace at the time of that kind of upheaval. So she brings Buddha along. And then, when she takes Buddha back to its region, everyone claims Buddha as an artifact. Neglecting his teachings claims Buddha as an artifact, as a piece of sculpture which is so old, which is nice because she brings it for all the emotions that it embodies, for its wisdom, for its pacifist approach to life at a time when so much of blood is being let out. And when she takes it back, they reincarnate it as an artifact, looking at its, looking at its age value, looking at its historicity, neglecting the very aspect for which the Buddha stood for. That was quite interesting, and some things are understated, but they carry the narrative and they carry the subtext very well.
Yes, in doors and borders and feminism. This was in my discussions with Deepa. She said these are the three important narratives of the book, where I liked it, on page 70, where the son, Bade, instructs the mother to put on Reeboks and stomp out of the door. How many of us do that to our own old people in the house, put on your Reeboks and go out and be active, So that's, of course, because he was trying to get her out of her depression. And Shiva and Olinda and Marion, would you like to say something? Because, Deepa also, because I don't want to be accused of taking all the time.
But it's interesting to listen to you, Sushila. You have so much of matter which is useful to us. Please go on.
Yes, because, this, when a person wins an International Booker Prize, what could be, Brian, the possible criteria for judging it? Because for me, although part one is so boring, at this time, it has such pictorial descriptions of chrysanthemums dancing in the sunlight and, where you talk about, what is the description of a tomb in a sand, and how tombs are symbolized in different points, different ways, and how tombs are explained on page 82, and how, this overseas son is so part of life of every family, where because somebody is overseas, his, his opinion or her opinion is so important in our family life, where,
Well,
yes.
yeah, I'll attempt to answer that, Sushila. Thank you. I feel that the strength of the novel is that it crosses all boundaries, and it has a very unifying element in its very layered presentation. It is a very positive novel because here you have Ma, who transcends herself, transcends her limitations to give a message to the world that there can be peace in spite of what is happening. uh, I want to also move to the idea of translation, where I was, I mean, I felt that the equivalence of Tomb of Stand to Ret Samadhi doesn't really hit the spot, because Samadhi is something and Tomb is something totally different. And this is what actually the author felt would throw the book in peril, because she has put on the front page right in the beginning, this little thing that, yeah, a state of deep meditation. So I don't think English can ever encapsulate, the thought process of Hindi in this sense, because there is no equivalence here. Also, I try to play around with the feeling that as the novel proceeds, language increasingly is thrown into crisis, because when she quotes right, left, and center from all the people who write ghazals, she's actually transliterating Fez into English, and then she gives a translation in English. So it's like, Hindi wants to reclaim this from the English text and say, no, actually it is written in Hindi. So this is for you to remember that. I also want to transit from here to that beautiful image you spoke about a little earlier about the well. And right in the beginning, when you shared part of your family experience where people had to jump into the well, this is the subject of a very powerful film called Khamosh Pani.
Yeah.
And it's written by Sabia Sumar, and we show it to our students. It is something that really hits the spot, and it amplifies what you're trying to say. And this discussion on partition would be solely incomplete if we don't mention Intezar Hussain. Intezar Hussain's book Basti, which you also teach on our course, actually frames this novel because it appears at critical moments in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. So why is, the author, let's say, arranging these set pieces, to give us a kind of a connotation which might otherwise escape us? So this is a chess game, and despite all the moves of the pawns, if you concentrate on the bishops and the queens, you're really going to get the message. So I'm so glad that, there are some of us who have, persisted and endured the prose. I'm sure Deepa won't like the use of the word, but I think it's something startling and it's something valuable for all of us.
In fact, Brian, yeah, would you like to go on?
No, carry on, please.
Okay. In fact, when my sister-in-law Sakina would talk about jumping in the well, I thought it was a very over-exaggerated story, oral history of the family. But when I read the book, I realized, and when you mention other books, that was the only resort left for some young girls. And definitely that became a part of the family's oral history. But this is what partition literature makes people sometimes, partition stories, rather, the true stories of partition, make families hate the other community forever. Like, I cannot imagine my sister-in-law's Muslim family ever forgiving the Sardajis for doing that to their pupo. Now, 3 generations have passed, but all 3 generations have heard this narrative.
But that way, Kamosh Pani is very redeeming, no? It kind of takes a different turn, doesn't it? Where it also brings out nuances which we understate in order to bring out this narrative of hate and keep alive this narrative of hate. So there comes a time when, like South Africa went, where you confess, tell, and be done with it. So I think in some sense, Benini's this thing, what was it? Beautiful story on the Nazi film. Yeah, Beautiful Life. That in some ways brings out the whole pathos of the, what happened to the, what the Nazis did. But it tells it in a way which treats it in a more positive sense. Positive, brings out the positive thing of humanity. There's hope that humanity expresses even through a debacle of that sort. So I think that is how we have to look at partition stories now, to look at the past as being past, and look how a new kind of redemption can take place, in these relationships. Because after all, like she says, the heart of India is also there. The heart of this, we are all one nation. Nothing separates us, not color of skin, not, food habits, not everything. Yet there's this big division, which what causes a wound in the heart. Okay.
In
Yes.
fact, the healing process of the bitterness of partition is so important for this generation to go on with life. Like it has rightly Savia put it, it has happened in South Africa, but it has not happened in USA. The racial problems there.
Yeah.
It's so surprising that in South Africa, suffering. Like, but it is much more, and people in South Africa is forgiven. This oral histories about partitions are something they are easy to give and forget for a person who reads literature, but difficult when you are a part of a family who has suffered it
Yeah.
and has gone through the trauma of it. It is so difficult to forgive and forget family,
Yeah.
because as academicians, we can discuss and we can talk about it, but it is not easy for you interview people who have suffered, and this generation remembers it as though it has happened yesterday. Okay, so I think it's time up, although
Can I just say, can I just mention one film, that's Pinjar? And Pinjar is very redeeming because despite, the revenge factor, the woman decides to go to the man who has abducted her. And it's a beautiful story, Pinjar, from a Punjabi short story writer. And that I felt gave us so much hope in this paper. Thank you.
true. Shiva and Marion and Olinda, before we wind up, would you like to say anything?
No, just wants to say thank you, Brian. Your explanation was also extremely good. We don't understand the underlying things, but it is encouraging for me to go and take the book up and read again. Not read again, start reading, actually.
Welcome.
Thank you very, very much, all of you. Yes, very, very interesting. Yes.
Yeah, in fact, Savia, I don't know whether Daisy has done a deliberate mistake or whether it's right or wrong. Maybe the English teachers will tell, but I found certain grammatical errors in her translation. Like on page 488, she talks about 2 youths with youths. Brian, is that right? Of course, the sentence goes on very beautifully that when youth use mobiles, it is either for seeing porn or that they are stoned. It rhymes very well, maybe better in Hindi. But is it to youths?
I think she takes liberties.
I
with
think
language.
in certain, yes, in certain circumstances, if the individuality of each of the youths is stressed and it is something that lends more meaning to the entire context, then they might be looked at, as youths. Because when you talk about youth without the S, then it's more generalized,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have that agency, to use Savia's word. Thank you.
Okay, fine. So,
She constructs a lot of these words. I can't recall now, but it's the way Indians do things with English language also. When they are using English words, very often there's a tendency to, give it a different turn of phrase. And she uses that liberally, like the way she conjugates verbs or something, to give an effect of how Indians use language.